people who help make it happen, from the programmers to the staff to people like Zach and Chris who support it. We're really grateful for all your work. Now, we need to introduce to you the platform before we introduce the guest. So if you're not used to Shindig, or if you haven't been here for a while, let me show you a few of the details. Right now, where I am and where the slide is, it's called the stage. This is where presenters are. This is where our guest is going to be in a minute. Right below where all of you guys are, that's the participation zone. That's where all the different participants are. And that usually gets broken out into a group of about 16 or 20. If you'd like to find other participants, once we get more than 16, I'm sure we've got that now. Click on the very, very bottom left. There's a little black bar that says mingle. If you click that, it'll bring up a film strip of everybody else who signed in this conference right now. And you can just scroll through there. And you can jump to different rooms if you like. Now, if you want to participate, besides watching and listening, which is fine, if you'd like to contribute, ask questions, shout, push back, we have 4 different venues for you to do that. So if you look at the very, very bottom right of your screen, you'll see 2 little orange circles. One of them has a hand and the word raise. If you click that, you'll tell us that you would like to come up on stage. So if your mic is working, your camera is working, you've got something to say, awesome. Click that, we'll put you in line. First chance we get, I'll knock myself off the stage and bring you up in my place. So you get to talk to Jamie, which is, I think, great. Now, if you don't feel like doing that, if you're shy or if your camera doesn't work or whatever, but you still want to get a question out there, click the orange ask button. That's a kind of mega chat. You type that in, we can display that and I'll read it out loud. Now, if you'd like to chat with your colleagues, people in the room with you, just mouse over your cursor and you'll see a little button that says I am chat. Click that, you get a chat room, which is right now buzzing with people introducing themselves and some nostalgia for Ann Arbor, Michigan, it seems. You can chat that way. And the fourth way is if you're on Twitter, go tweet away and use the hashtag FTTE. We've been collecting questions this week and we'll have conversation going away. I'm going to record the Twitter stream to Restorify and share it via Twitter and via the blog later on. So that's a lot of different ways to collaborate, and that's what this is all about. This is a very participatory event. Now, speaking of participation, let me introduce our guest, who has one of the most impressive photos of all the participants and all the guests we've had so far. Because Jamie is, as you can see, addressing you from the White House, which is pretty good. That's a pretty good perk. Jamie works for a little company you may have heard of called Google. He's the senior education evangelist there. He also works at Arizona State University, and I think he's in Phoenix right now, where he's been teaching there, I think, 10 or 12 years. Jamie is very concerned with issues of social justice and access, the revolutionary possibilities of education and technology, which is why we've got him here. So, Shindig folks, if you could haul down the PowerPoint slide and put Jamie up, we can get started.
Hey, Brian.
Welcome, sir. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Good to see you here. Really glad
I'm actually,
you made time.
to give you
Are
context,
you in Phoenix?
Yeah, so I'm in Phoenix. I'm home, which is a rare thing, and I am talking to you out of my office / 2-year-old's playroom. We had just moved to this house, and we have a garage that we're going to convert into my office. So in the meantime, I'm borrowing her playroom, and so I get to work and play with trains, as you can see behind me at the same time.
That's beautiful. That's a fantastic metaphor. I think you'll find people here in the Future Transform world are pretty creative and quite playful, if not actively goofy. Can you just take a minute before we go further and tell us, what do you do with Google? What does being an educational evangelist mean?
Yeah, so it's one of those weird jobs because I don't think we hire for these positions. I've been at Google for 10 years. I just celebrated my 10th year at Google, and I've been in the education space for all those 10 years. My kind of project or career at Google started when I joined Google when we used to have an office in Phoenix, and I was asked to go find some projects to work on with ASU. And one of those meetings was with the CIO at ASU, Adrian Sainer, who was the CIO at ASU at the time. And we had come up with different ideas and different things that we can work on. And one of them was this issue that he was having with student email accounts. He had students that weren't using the 200 megabyte hard drive space email systems that were provided to students. He couldn't communicate with them. They were all over the place. Students had to submit what emails they were using, but then they would use something else, and it was just a big mess. And I remembered that, whenever this is me fresh at Google, so you know that when you're interviewing for a company, you find out about everything that they're working on. And one of the projects that I knew about was this thing called Google for Your Domain. And by the time I got to them, they were already, Google for Work and Google for Education. And so I reached out to them and said, hey, here's an issue that ASU is dealing with. What do you think? And I had this idea that they could use Google for Your Domain as part of their solution, and they were actively looking and recruiting universities at the time. And so we had this connection, we had this 4-hour meeting, and then 2 weeks later we launched Google Apps for Education at ASU at EDUCAUSE, and I fell in love with the space. And education is something, I was already a professor at ASU, so education is something that I was already involved in and doing. And then joined the team officially, and then worked with a bunch of universities, and then had this crazy idea about launching Google Apps in the K-12 back in 2009. And the team came together. We launched Google Apps in the K-12 by adding walled gardens and making sure that the addresses were private and all these other things that we needed to do. And then a couple of years of working inside the K-12 space, had this other crazy idea when I saw this product called a Chromebook, that we should launch Chromebooks in education. And the team bought right in, and we launched Chromebooks in education. So my role has been to evolve with all the different projects that we've had in education. So we started from a team of 2 or 3 people, and now we're 100 plus there's a whole bunch of engineers that are working on education products. So my job is to continue to kind of talk about the role of technology in education, to continue to talk about what we should and could do with technology in education, and then also internally to work with all the different teams at Google to make sure that we're focused on the right stuff, and to make sure that we continue to grow and get great feedback from our users out in the education space.
Well, fantastic. What a great story. Just on a personal note, my 18-year-old is very, very skeptical about almost everything in the universe. But he does quietly really like Google Apps for Education. He's been using it throughout his high school career. So that's quiet approval from him is shouting enthusiasm from anybody else. Well, I'm sure people here are going to have all kinds of requests and comments for you. But let me, if I could, bring up a couple that have come up. We seeded this conversation by asking people for questions on Twitter. As you know, you've already responded to a few. So I wanted to bring up a couple that have come up and just give you a chance to chew on them. Gary Grossman wanted to know a question about declining state support for public universities, and whether highly profitable private companies, I guess by that he means Google and others, should step in to support public universities. What do you think about this combination of trends with declining state support and rising tech company interest?
Yeah, that's a great question. And you and I discussed this earlier, but I haven't looked at any of the questions, and we haven't discussed any of the questions, so I might not have the best answers that come to the top of my head, but I'll give you some reactions to something like that. I think, I'm very involved with ASU here in Arizona. I think that Michael Crow is a hero to me. He's a mentor to me, and he's done some amazing work when it comes to ASU, as he has had declining revenue or declining state funding for the work that he's doing at ASU. He's had to do a lot more with a lot less, and he wants to do a lot more. So I'm totally aware of these issues and what's going on in this space. I also think that I'm not a tax expert. I don't know anything about Google's tax policies and what we do and don't support. But I think that there is a role for all technology companies to play in the education space. Now, I don't have the numbers, for example, for Google Apps for Education and what universities might be saving by using that platform, right? I know that ASU At the time, Adrian saying this is again like 9 years ago, he mentioned something in the neighborhood between 500,000 and $1 million that he just had to stop spending because he could use Google Apps. And that's just one snapshot example from 9 years ago of the savings. Now, $1 million isn't anywhere near what they could be saving or should be saving or what we could be contributing. But I absolutely think that technology companies, all companies should play a role. That it should be a partnership between whatever companies are in the community and the university systems that we have. At the same time, university systems, and because of the lack of funding, there are some big issues here, especially as it comes to equity, right? Take ASU, for example. ASU charges, I don't know what the numbers are anymore, even though I paid for my daughter to go to school there. ASU, let's say they charge $10,000 a semester for in-state students. Well, they charge $25,000. Again, I'm making up the numbers. $25,000 for an out-of-state student. So, to get more revenue, what they do is they go try to recruit students from outside the state to come in, and that has a huge impact and detriment to the actual citizens in the state that need to take advantage of those state universities. So there's some big issues in the space in terms of funding, in terms of. I just read an article, I think it was in the New York Times, about how as we are progressing positively from the recession that we are in, there are a number of indicators that show that our state university systems have not recovered from the recession and are not getting back the funding that was cut from them over the last 5 or 6 years. So huge issues in the space. I think everyone should be playing a role, and we should definitely keep talking about it.
Well, the states are definitely way below where they were. Let me ask you a follow-up question. I'm struck by your cost-saving argument, which is a good one. Do you think that there's a role for Google to support all of higher education, public and private, in moving towards greater use and production of open education materials?
Yeah, I absolutely think that if you think of it this way, right? So one of the things I often ask, I get a question like, why is Google involved in education? And my first answer that ever popped into my head was Google was involved in education the moment Google launched Google.com, because education starts with seeking for information, right? And so we've always been involved in education right from the very beginning, and I think we should be playing a role in the education space. But I also think that there's a lot of resources out there, and I would say, and this is the Jamie Casap opinion, if I want to learn something, if I want information, if I want content, I would say search for me is like, on a scale of 1 to 10, like a 3. Like, I think we could do much better in terms of access to information and getting the right information and getting credible information. There's a lot of noise out on the internet, and so how is it that we can do a better job relying on open source and open resources that are available to all students, especially again as an equity issue for students who can't afford a $200 textbook, who can't afford some of the resources that they need to participate in their classes. And oftentimes, I remember, look, I grew up as a poor kid, and I remember having to spend a good chunk of my financial aid or my stipend or money that I had from working on textbooks. And I remember the most frustrating part of that experience was I would spend, this is 100 years ago. So I would spend $150 or $100 on a textbook and then go through a whole semester and never use the textbook, right? And then try to resell it back and I get 20 bucks for it. Right? And it's this frustrating process. And I think it's still the same. My daughter, like I said, just graduated from college last year, and she stopped buying textbooks because she found other ways to get to the information. So again, we're at the very beginning of what's possible in this space, and I think we should all be playing a role in this.
Well, that's really, really heartening to hear. OER and open education has been a steady theme for the Future Transform. But let me get out of the way. We've got a couple of questions already coming up from people in the crowd right now. Mark Wilson has a question. Let me read it to you, and Zach, if you could bring it up on stage. Question about when will Google Education get to supporting community colleges? It seems there's a missing link in education pathways.
Well, we do, depends on how you define the word support. We are involved with a bunch of community colleges Google Apps is used, for example, because I worked on this, here in Arizona, the Maricopa College Community System is the largest community college system, or the second largest in the country, and all these schools are using Google Apps. I know that Pima Community College, I've worked with the CIO down in Pima and Tucson, they use Google Apps. I know Virginia College Community System, they use Google Apps. So I know lots of community college systems that are using our tools. In terms of support, obviously we can always do much more and much more work. And I know, for example, for me personally, there are a number of events and that are coming up in 2017 that I'll be involved in and speaking at and participating in, because I think community college can play a huge role. Here, I'm part of a team here that founded a school, a public school called the Phoenix Coding Academy. And one of the things that we just launched the school. It's a regular high school. It's not a charter school, not a private school. And one of the things that we're starting to do is have conversations with the community colleges here around how we can make the learning experience better for students at a school like the Phoenix Coding Academy, taking advantage of the resources that community colleges have.
Excellent. That's a really good answer, a very heartening answer to a great question. Thank you, Mark. We have another question. This time, Zach, can you boot me off the stage and bring Eric Patnudes? Man, I'm sorry, Eric, I massacred your name. Bring Eric up on stage, please.
Hey Brian, no worries. Hey, what's up, Jamie? How you doing, man?
Did you see the email on the?
Can you guys hear me okay?
You and everyone who works in that office.
Oh, I know. The background noise is real. So, Jamie, quick question I wanted to ask. I agree with all of the potential that technology can bring to public education. The thing I always go back to is wondering, regardless of how innovative technology becomes and how many great ideas there are to transform education, part of me wonders that if we don't also change the priorities as a society, will technology ever realize the potential that it has? Like, for example, I live in a subdivision with 1,100 houses, and we have a Facebook page with access to all these homeowners. And every once in a while, it's kind of like a community, hey, I need a painter, or I lost my dog, or people ask for reference. And every once in a while, I'll ask a question about homework or about public education, and I get zero response. People are very quick to just deny that there's any need to change education. They're very comfortable with tradition and what they know. And so I think one of the biggest missing pieces is to get parents involved in this conversation and get parents to care and understand that their kids really aren't getting the best educational opportunities that they could. A lot of parents are just willing to be like, yeah, no, whatever. I'm good with my reality TV and going to work every day and paying my bills, and I don't want to think about education. So how do we get over that?
Yeah, and that's a great question, because what you're mentioning are the good parents. I grew up with no parents, so there are a lot of kids who are growing up that don't have any support at all, right, from adults in their lives. And so absolutely, but those parents that are involved, those parents that do participate, they do an amazing job. I think part of it is turning to them and asking them to help to get other parents involved. And a couple of examples of that. One is, my kid goes to school here in downtown Phoenix, and we have one event, right? The parent orientation during the first couple of weeks of school. Everyone shows up and meets the parents and teachers, and then that's it. We don't get invited back. There's no engagement. There's no community thing. There's no way to stay involved and stay integrated into the school system. So schools need to do a better job of that. And so just yesterday, again, the school that I'm involved here, the Phoenix Coding Academy, what we are designing is a speaker series that kids are going to run, that kids are going to produce, that kids are going to do all the work. a group of 4 or 5 students that want to participate in the speaker series. And what we're going to do is we're going to start with one event and then do 2 events and then hopefully get to the point where we're doing monthly events where these speaking series things are going to happen in the afternoon, like 5 or 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock, where parents can come. And we're going to do them at the school. We're going to invite speakers in, like, Dr. Crow. The whole goal is like invite presidential candidates, invite people in the community, invite other people to get their perspective and their view on whatever topic it is that the kids are interested to hear about. And we're going to let the kids run that, and we're going to invite the community and parents, and we're going to get the word out. We're going to live stream it. We're going to record it. We're going to post it on a website. So it takes work to do these things, and I think that's just one school in the 112,000 schools that there are in the country, and it's one of those things where it's not that hard to do. It's just a question of will.
I totally agree, man. I think that's a great idea, and if you get that off the ground and you're looking to branch out and connect with other communities who want to do something similar and kind of operationalize that, keep me in a loop, because I'm very much looking for those same kinds of ideas. Where our last local election, we had 11% out for the local election, and the average age was 60 years old. But on this Facebook page, everybody complains about everything that's wrong, but then nobody goes to the local elections. So I love that idea of getting the kids involved, because when kids are ultimately the goal of who we're trying to help, it's really hard for adults to say no or to come up with excuses why it won't work. So that's.
Yeah, I was going to say that's why we want to do it. We want kids to run it, but it's a good idea to document what we do so that we can actually to make sure that we have here's a speaker series in the box, if you will, that we can share with the community. But that's what we want to run. That's what we're going to do, and we're kicking it off in November. So we got some work to do between now and then to put it all together.
That's just a month and a half from now. Good luck. No, that sounds like a great operation. I'm glad you got that outreach to K-12. It seems like
the idea, right? What I said to the teachers that I'm working with on this is the idea is if you come to Phoenix, if you have a book, if you have a platform, if you have something, you have to speak at our school, right? That's the goal, right? That the goal is you can't come through Phoenix and not speak at the Phoenix Building Academy, right? That's our goal.
Nice, very nice. I have questions to go with, but there's still more coming that have come up. One is from Sam Anderson, who has a specific question for Google Apps for Education. He wants to know if there are any plans to make it easier for students and other users within Google Apps for Education domains to move document and file ownership out of that domain to a personal account when a student graduates or otherwise leaves the institution.
Yeah, I totally understand. That's a question that's been coming up for a long time. Absolutely an issue that the engineering team knows about. And let's talk about the root of what happened. The root of what happened is that we looked at Gmail accounts the way you and I look at work accounts, right? Where if you're working at a company and then you leave that company, you can't take your stuff with you, right? You're stuck with, you can't, take everything. You can't take your email address. You can't take anything. So the structure of something like Gmail, used that kind of enterprise model when it launched. The truth is, I used to have a joke 8-9 years ago that if we could do it all over again, my goal would be that every kid that's born gets a social security card and a Gmail address, right? And then you tie that Gmail address comes to a school, and then you do an alias and it ties to that email address, and then wherever that kid goes, everything follows with them, right? That would be ideal. We just didn't start it that way. And so there's a team internally at Google that's focused on trying to solve that problem and how to identify that problem. There are some kind of Band-Aid approaches like Takeout where you can actually, go in and take all your data with you, or there's a way that, even me personally, sometimes when I create something and I'm using my Google account, I copy my Gmail account to make sure it's also in my Gmail. I do silly things like that aren't very effective, but at least are temporary things that you can do. But absolutely agree, and I know the engineering team agrees that that's a problem that they'd like to solve.
Well, good. I hope that answers your question, Sam. It's a great question. Let me ask one more question from Twitter. This is from Derek Moore. And he asks the question of what challenges is Google trying to solve in education? And along with that, he fleshes that out. What approaches and tools might best help, and how to prevent a one-size-fits-all approach?
Yeah, that's great. And I think that that's the biggest problem, right? Is the one size fits all. I think everywhere I go and when I talk to education leaders or thought leaders in this space, I always, the follow-up question is, how do you scale? How do you scale? And the problem with real innovation is it doesn't scale, right? And so what changes things is what's always changed things. And it's the Margaret Mead quote, right? It's, a dedicated small group of people that want to change something. That's what changes. And so the school, for example, here in Phoenix, the Phoenix Coding Academy, what the system change is 8 teachers and a principal who started working on this 8-9 months before the school launched with autonomy and a blank sheet of paper that they can build this. Now, that's what it took. Now, whatever they build, whatever they create, can we use that and scale it in other schools? Maybe some of it, but not all of it. And I think that's the first realization that we have to come to, is that change happens in small quantities, small groups of people that work together to bring that change about. And so what we can do is provide the tools to help do that. And I always like to say, and I always make sure I'm very clear on this whenever I speak, is that technology is not the silver bullet, right? Technology is not the solution and the end all to great education. It's an enabling and supporting capability, tremendous enabling and supporting capability, but it's not the answer. The great answer is great education and using technology as a supporting and enabling capability. If all we do is put Google Apps in schools, if all we do is put Chromebooks in schools or iPads in schools, whatever solution we have, and we don't change what we're doing, then all we've done is taken the old education model and make it faster and more efficient. And I don't think any of us want to do that, right? We want to bring education to the next level. And one last point on this is I always like to make sure I point this out, which is, the rhetoric that education is broken, that it's failing and that it's falling apart and that teachers are terrible. I think that's the wrong approach, right? I think if you actually look at the history of education and you go back to Dewey and you study all the things that have happened in education over the last 100 years, we've done some tremendous things with education in this country, right? We've elevated education in this country for the last 100 years. So it's not necessarily that I think we need to fix education. I think what we need to do is just bring it to the next level and to think about the world that we face now and how do we take education and bring it to the next level to help us get to that, get to what we're facing today, because the world has fundamentally changed in lots of different ways in my lifetime. And so how do we take advantage of those changes in education?
You remind me a bit of Richard DeMello. Have you looked at his Revolution in Higher Education book?
Yeah, I haven't read through the whole thing, but I've read excerpts of it, and people have passed me on stuff. It's really good stuff there.
Yeah. We had him on as a guest in April. He's a very, very sharp guy. We have another questions come up, this time from David Rass. And Zach, if you could put it up so we could see it as well when I read it. He wants to know, can you describe a few of the most innovative uses of technology that you've seen in the last year or two on college campuses?
Oh, that's a great question. So here's the thing about innovation in higher ed. I've seen some tremendous innovations happen in K-12, right? I've seen teachers change what they're doing in their classroom to move from the let's put data in kids' heads to let's get them to think deeper. And I've seen them use technology to take advantage of some of those things. I haven't seen that much of that happen in the higher ed space. Now, I'll give you my daughter's example. So she started off in a school in, we'll call it Minnesota. She was up there attending a college, went on a full ride scholarship to go swim there. And she had spent 4 years in high school using technology, using Google Apps, at the time it wasn't Chromebooks, I think she was using MacBooks, but she was using technology in everything that she did, got good grades, got into a pattern, into a habit of how she uses technology, how she takes notes, how she does things. She couldn't go anywhere without a laptop. And so she showed up at college, and 3 out of her 4 professors, when she brought her laptop in, those professors like, I'm sorry, you can't use technology in my class. You can't use that in my classroom, right? And she left. She's like, okay, bye, and then she transferred down to ASU. And so to me, it's not so much what innovation is happening in higher ed is what are we stifling in terms of innovation in higher ed with that kind of attitude, with that position, and instead of how do we take advantage of the technology, how do we look at some of the models that are working really well in K-12, right, and bring them to higher ed. There was a New York Times article a couple months ago about the lecture in higher ed and how there's a cultural element to lecturing and how lecturing might be really good for one type of culture but might not work really well for others. And yet we have all this evidence, but we don't change anything. And so I think the real innovation that I'm seeing in higher ed is around just taking some elements from K-12 and bringing it into their classroom. Some professors are doing that, but it's rare and far in between. So I think we could do a lot more work in that space.
Well, that's a terrific answer, and I like how it's consistent with your observation about Google enabling change. And I'm really struck by that gap between K-12 and higher ed. I'm seeing the same gap myself. Before I go further, we have another question from Sam Anderson, who just can't leave you alone, man. How is Google actively working to make the online world a less hostile place for women, people of color, LGBTQ folks, and others? I know it's a question dear to your heart.
Yeah, that's a great question. And honestly, I know that there are teams. So we have, we have these employee resource groups internally at Google, right? So I'm part of the Hispanic network group internally at Google, and there's a Black network group, and there's a whole bunch of different resource groups at Google. And I know every one of those groups are concerned, and there are different projects. I fail to give you an update on some of those projects, mostly because those kind of read emails are labeled in my inbox that I need to go and dig and read to see what kind of projects are coming up. But I know I'm comforted in knowing that there are people internally at Google that care about these things and are focused on it. As a person of color who every once in a while, gets some commentary from people on Twitter or Facebook or other places, I'm very familiar with what's out there. But so I know that people internally at Google care about these issues and are looking for technology solutions to alleviate some of that. Everything from one of the things that we did many years ago, right, was the whole you have to use your name, when you're posting comments on YouTube, right? So things like that I know the team cares about and are working on, but I don't have a specific project that they're doing. And honestly, I probably after this we'll try to dig into a little bit of research internally to see what are some of the projects that we're working on. So I'm sure most of them I can't talk about, but I want to know that we're actively trying to solve some of these issues.
Well, that's a nice peek into Google. And Jamie, I'd be happy to follow up with you afterwards to see what else we can learn. Now, I have to pause right now because this is the time in the Future Transform when we mingle. And what happens here is Jamie and I get off the stage and we join you guys and we talk about a question for the next 5 minutes. Now, the great thing about this platform is that you can group together with people in groups of 2, 3, or 4 just by clicking on them. And then you have your own private, under code of silence conversation. And the question I'd like you to think about is where are you seeing people around you at your institution or nearby using these Google tools in creative and innovative ways? And if you want to think a little further ahead, where do you see that changing over the next 2 years? For example, do you think if you are a traditional undergraduate institution, do you think you'll see an influx of former high school students used to using Chromebooks and JFE in high school? Will you see them pressuring the undergraduate experience to have a continuation of that? So think about where you're seeing these innovative and creative uses of Google tools. Take 5 minutes, talk about that, and come back. Now, if you don't want to talk, that's okay. I understand if you're at lunch or your mic doesn't work or you're shy, that's fine. Just mouse over your own cursor, click a little lock button. That way, no one can intrude on you without their permission. I'm a very open person. I'm happy to be intruded on, so you guys can jump on me, and I'm sure Jamie's the same way. So let's take 5 minutes, think about this, and we'll come back. Zach, bring us down.
hands-on, making stuff is absolutely critical to the learning environment. And so I see us doing that at the Phoenix Coding Academy. We're going to have a robotics team. We're going to have a 3D printing team. We're going to have all different things in that space.
Well, welcome back. Welcome back
Sure.
to the stage, Jimmy. I just had a very exciting group of people. What did you find talking to people? What were folks talking about? What did they think?
So,
Innovative use of
I got a couple questions about the maker movement and how you see it in the K-12 space and the higher ed space. I think that that's an exciting, place where, I don't know why we call it the maker movement. We can just call it learning. And then a question around, I think, one of those big elephants in the room around publishers and their role and how they're contributing to either access to content or the curation of content. So we had some good conversations about that.
Who do you think is, or let me rephrase that, do you think K-12 is ahead on the makerspace movement as well? Or is that an area where higher ed is making progress?
I think higher ed's making progress, but I think it comes from, one thing that we haven't talked about today is the generation of kids that we're talking about, right? So I created I have my own personal social experiment. I have 3 kids. I have a 24-year-old, a 15-year-old, and a 2-year-old. Right? I have a kid in every generation, right? So I have a millennial, I have a Generation Y, a Generation Z, and the new generation that we haven't even named yet. So I get to watch them all interacting with technology and the experiences of the world. But there's a huge difference between my 24-year-old and my 15-year-old, right? And watching that 15-year-old grow up in a completely different world is very interesting. So we have to think about that generation and what they're used to doing. So, for example, my 15-year-old doesn't go to Foot Locker and buy sneakers. He designs and makes his customized sneakers online and then has them shipped, right? He doesn't play PlayStation 4 or waits for video console games to come out. Him and his friends run a server and play their own video games and make video games, right? It's even between 2 kids, you can see the difference. And so that is going to have a huge impact on what's happening in education when you have a group of kids who are used to making things, who are used to building things, customizing things. How does that impact what we do in education?
Quite a lot. And I'm impressed at that small difference. That was, what, 9 years between your 15-year-old and your 24-year-old?
My 24-year-old last year asked for a Polaroid camera for Christmas, and my 15-year-old was like, what the hell is a Polaroid camera? Right? Like, it's just the difference between those two is night and day. And I can't even imagine the difference between my 15-year-old and my 2-year-old and how they see the world. Oh, we were watching, all 3 kids were over at the house last night, and my 2-year-old, we were watching a video, Spider-Man video from 1967. She's into Spider-Man now. But we were watching the Spider-Man song on my phone, and I got a notification, and she just swiped up on the notification on the phone, right? Like 2 years old, like, get that notification out of my way. Knew exactly what to do with that notification on my phone, right? So I can't even imagine what her world is going to be like.
Well, we have to try. We have to keep imagining and seeing where that could go. I just had to report from my Mingle session that people were very excited, and they shared your impression of K-12 being ahead of post-secondary education. They were talking about in many ways, kind of the inertia of faculty, but also the specialization of faculty and how that's a little different, makes them feel more constrained.
Well, it's an important topic, but it's also important for us to take a step back and ask ourselves, does it have to be equal, or is it a different format? And what I mean by that is, I think the role of a K-12 teacher has gone from taking data from a textbook and putting it into a kid's head and having them memorize those facts to being better managers and coaches and integrators in the classroom, and they're starting to play that role, where a college professor, at least a good portion of them, actually wrote the textbook. So they are the subject matter expert. So, how does that change what innovation happens in a classroom? And so I think more than anything is understanding the differences between, what are the things that we need to memorize versus what are the things that we need to lecture on versus what are the things that we need to get kids to understand at a deeper level. And I'll give you a quick example of that. We have these debates about kids memorizing things versus not memorizing things. And I want kids to memorize things. Again, my 2-year-old, for 6 months, we've been sitting, every night in the bathtub when I give her a bath, we have those letters that stick to the side of the wall. And for 6 months, I pull out the A and I go, "What's this?" And she goes, "A." And I beam with pride, right? And then I grab the B and I go, "What's this?" And she goes, "A." I'm like, "Okay, we're gonna keep working on this." I want her to memorize letters. I want her to memorize numbers. I want her to memorize things. But then the better question is, what do we do from there, right? So my 50-year-old had to memorize a list of Spanish country capitals because he was in Spanish class last year. And he got 100 and he got them all right. And then I asked him that question at the end of school. And I asked him, "Hey, the last day of school, I said, hey, what are the countries with what are the Spanish capitals?" And he named like 4 of them, right? So that didn't work, right? What's a better question? What's a deeper meaning question? How do we get kids to understand things at a deeper level? I think is what we should be focusing on in both higher ed and
K-12. While you were talking about this, Michael Crawford instant messaged me and then he did a question which seems to develop that a little further. So let me just relay this back to you. He wants to know, given the proliferation and adoption of technology, how must the role of the educator change? Well, you're describing K-12 as a classic shift from the sage on the stage to the guide on the side. But you're saying that in higher ed, you still have the professor as content expert. How do you think that should change? Should that follow suit, becoming the guide on the side, or is there some totally new pedagogy that we should be anticipating in higher ed?
Yeah, I don't like the term guide on the side. I don't like the term facilitator because I don't like to be a facilitator. I like to be engaged. I like to be part of whatever it is that we're discussing or building or whatever it is that we do. And I think the role is a deeper one than being on the side or being a facilitator in K-12. I think if we think about what are the skills that kids need to develop for jobs that don't exist, for problems that we want to solve that we haven't fully defined, I think that we need to focus on the things that we've always talked about, right? Problem solving, creativity, critical thinking, these types of collaboration, right? We haven't even talked about collaboration as being a critical skill that kids need. And if those are the things that we want to focus on, then the role of the teacher in K-12 is to be a manager, to be what are the 4 kids that can work on? What are the 4 personalities of kids that can work together? What are the skill sets that these kids bring to the table that they can work on together? Because, not to get all cheesy, but there's something very positive about knowing that whatever I create is only going to get better when I put it in front of my teammates, right? When I get their feedback and I get their input.
Yes.
And so what's the role of the teacher in that kind of space in K-12? In higher ed, to your point, what of the subject matter expert, what is the role of the professor? And you've got different professors. I'm a professor at CU. I haven't written a textbook, so I'm not the subject matter expert a lot of the times in the classroom. So I get a chance to be more of a collaborative teacher. I get to be more of a leader in the classroom, or more than anything, I'm managing teams of students working on stuff together. But in higher ed, I think that we still need to define what is that role of a professor in the classroom and what role do they play in the learning that kids need to develop.
And that's still open. We still aren't quite sure what that could be. No, we need to think about that. Before we press that further, we have a question from Seth Goodman. And Zach, if you could bring that up. He's curious to know what might be on the horizon for the Google Classroom, considering that there are many learning management systems competing in this space. That's a great question.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'll say this about Google Classroom. First, the team embarrassed me in my 10-year career at Google. I used to walk around saying that Google will never build a tool specifically for education. Never, ever, ever. And they proved me wrong. We build Classroom, but it's important to understand where Classroom came from because I think it sets the stage for where it's going. And Google Classroom was designed by a group of engineers who had visited classrooms to see how Google Apps was being used in the classroom, and they were shocked and embarrassed on how it was being used. teachers had these boards up in their wall of like, first you do this, and then you send it here, and then you save it here, and then you put it in this drive folder, and then you let me know. Like they had these steps that kids have to follow, and they're like, oh my goodness, that can't happen. So they went getting feedback from teachers and educators on trying to make Google Apps easier for them to use. Right? That was the whole point of Classroom. It wasn't born from let's build a learning management system. It was born from this idea of let's make Google Apps more efficient, more effective, give teachers more time so they don't have to have a 12-step process to assigning things for students and getting back assignments from them. So that's where it came from. And I'll say this, is that I don't know if it's a learning management system. What I do know is that it's being built and designed by educators, because, and I would encourage all of you who are using Google Classroom or know people who are using Google Classroom to always be providing feedback, because there's a real person, Jen Miller, who goes into that feedback and reads through all that feedback, and that's where the feature requests come from. That's where the next build comes from. And so Classroom, being a year and a half old, has come a long way, but most of it is because of the feedback that we've gotten from educators. And so I think if the team just focuses on that and keep building it, one, to bring innovation into the classroom, and maybe secondly to take innovation to the next level using Google Classroom as that platform, getting feedback from educators and building it for the problems that educators are trying to solve in their classes, I think it'll turn into whatever it turns into being, but it'll be a positive outcome no matter what we call it.
I'm afraid that what we're going to have to call it is just about a day. We are just seconds away from the end of the hour. We have time for one last question from Alex Stern. Alex asks about the maker movement and wants to know, it comes out of higher ed arts education. How else can the arts impact education via technology? I wonder if Alex is thinking about STEAM, for example.
Yeah, so a lot of, I'm a big fan of computer science, right? Obviously, that sounds like a dumb moment. I think that if we think of STEAM or STEM, technology isn't just involved in STEAM or STEM. Technology is in everything that we do. And oftentimes in my presentation, I ask the audience, whether it's 100 people or 5,000 people, how many of you have not used technology today? And no one ever raises their hand, because technology has become part of our lives and everything that we do. And so the question for me is, how do understanding or recognizing that technology is part of everything that we do, including the arts. My daughter is a great example. She came to me with this idea before she started college that she was going to be a marketing major. And I said, what is a marketing major? Like, no, you're not going to be a marketing major. I'm like, you're going to do what you're passionate about, which is making films, because that's what she's been doing since she was 5 years old. And so I made her go into an arts program, and she joined the Herberger program at ASU and became a film production major, and that's what she graduated with. But you think about film production as a storytelling endeavor, right? That's what she does. She tells stories. But 100% of the background of that storytelling is technology. The cameras that she uses, the editing software, how she publicizes it, how she creates awareness around it. Everything has a technology element to that art, and I think that's true in everything that we do.
Question is then, what art gets to add to it? How art gets to make use of technology and make new things?
Yeah, right. How do you take it? Again, just the last point here is, when if you think of something like motion pictures, the first motion pictures, where I would call them the first MOOCs. They actually, the idea to say, oh, motion pictures, we can take stagecraft, we can take stage plays and film them and then bring them to the masses, right? That was the whole point of it. And then someone says, well, what if we use 2 cameras? Well, what if we take the cameras outside? What if we create a green screen? Like that's how the innovation happened, and that's what I'm excited about. So to your point, how does art use technology to bring art in directions that we haven't even thought about?
That 2-step process happens in just about every technology. You get that first step where you copy and paste an old practice, and then you look closely at it and figure out, what can I do that's new here? We have to do something that's very old. We have to close up shop.
And that's my role, right? And that's why when I travel around the world and I talk to educators and I talk to folks in the space, that's what I want them to do. I want them to, what else can we do? How do we, what's the next step? What's the next level of this? And that's what I'm excited about. That's why I think it's the most exciting time in education.
And that answers my first question I asked you this afternoon. Jamie, thank you so much for a rich, passionate, informative, and challenging hour. I'm so glad you're able to be here. And I want to thank everybody who participated for coming up with so many fantastic questions. With great regret, I have to ask the Shindig folks to knock you off the stage so we can put the final PowerPoint slides up. But once again, thank you so much. If you have time, stick around to hobnob informally. Otherwise, we will follow up later, and I want to have you back.
All right, sounds good.
Good. So thanks again to everybody. Let me just give you a couple of pointers for the next week. Next week we have Phil Ventimiglia. He's a Chief Innovation Officer from Georgia State. He's been doing some very, very exciting stuff about trying to future orient that great university. So get ready with questions for Phil, and I'm sure we'll have a really, really energizing time. And while you're not doing that, you might also be reading science fiction. So we're wrapping up in our science fiction reading group with Infomocracy, coming to the end of this novel. If you haven't read it, it's a very timely book about the possibilities of combining mobile devices, big data, data analytics, and elections. It's a whole novel about elections in the future. Can't get more timely than that. I also want to say thanks to everybody. If you want to learn more about what we're doing, the ftte.us will take you to the Future Trends Report. Shindig.com will tell you more about this technology. And if you want a little bit of entertainment and humor, this morning I just posted on my blog about the Devil's Dictionary of Educational Technology. I think I've already hurt some people and may have made enemies for life. It's very entertaining. Take a look. I'll be here for a few minutes. Until then, see you guys next week. Bye-bye.